We're back now with none other than Kevin O'Leary, star of Shark Tank and chairman of O-Shares ETFs. And we'll be talking about watches as an alternative investment. Kevin, it's an honor to have you back on Kitco. Welcome back. Happy New Year.
Great to be here. Thank you very much. And Happy New Year to you as well.
Kevin, you're probably one of the most diversified investors that I've had the privilege of speaking to. You've got stocks, cryptocurrencies, gold, venture capital from your Shark Tank deals. And of course, you've got watches. And we'll be talking about just watches today, both from a collector's perspective, but also from an investor's perspective. Now, I'll start by talking about my own personal journey with watches, and then we'll talk about yours. And look, I've obviously not been in this game for as long as you have. I started my own little collection last year. I bought a few beginner items for myself, and when I finally saved enough for a nice piece, I started watching reviews online. I watched a bunch of your videos where you did reviews and your vlogs and interviews that you've done with other dealers, and finally I settled on a Grand Seiko because you keep raving about these every chance you get, so thank you indirectly. Let's talk about your personal journey. You've got a wide spectrum of watches in your collection. Since when did you start collecting?
Well, my stepfather worked with the United Nations, and we traveled a lot, and it's headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. And so he was constantly going back there. We have a home in Geneva. He's now, in fact, a Swiss citizen. And in the 70s, mid-70s, he introduced me, took me down the Rue de Lac. We drove right into Geneva, and all the great maisons are right there by the lake in Geneva. That famous water spout. You're going to find Rolex, Patek, AP, all of them. They're all there. You can walk between these massive maisons. And he took me in and started showing me watchmaking as an industry and the output at that time. And I just got hooked. I mean, when I was a teenager, I knew all the different makes, all the brands, all the models, all the movements, all the calibers, all the cases, all the dials. Wow. And yet I couldn't afford anything. Right. Because, it just was out of my reach, and he wasn't going to extend, he taught me to go make it on my own. When I could afford it, I came back with a vengeance, but I already knew pretty well all the details of what was collectible, what wasn't, what makes, what brands, what was hot, all of it. And so I have been insatiable in terms of building my collection. And I enjoy it so much. And the watch community globally is a fascinating group of individuals, kings, monarchs, collectors, physicians. I mean, you name it. It's just the most remarkable. And I know most of the world's largest watch collectors now. That's the bond between us.
Do you remember the first piece you bought?
Yes, I do. Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch.
Wow, that's the classic. Okay.
Mid-70s. Yes. And I've had since then, 2 of my collections have been stolen inside jobs. But that piece I was able to recover. And it's a very valuable piece, both emotionally, but also the movement, the caliber at that time was very important because they built some of the best movements then, because they're, of course, in the NASA program at that time.
Right. Did you buy the Snoopy Moonwatch that came out recently? Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. And I'm actually going to be getting that in a few weeks. It's going to be one of my Shark Tank 8s in season 14. It will be a one-of-a-kind with a red band on it. And I think the reason the Snoopy is taken off, for those of you who don't know it, in the back dial, there is Snoopy on a rocket ship going to the moon. And the Bitcoin community has gone berserk over that watch. And so I don't flip my watches, but if I wanted to sell it, I could make a fortune on that piece, but I won't be doing that.
Well, especially since it's got your signature red band on it. I know the story behind that. I'm going to talk to the audience about some of the pieces that you have today to show us. But first, I want to get your thoughts on this story. I was reading an article by the Financial Times that came out about a month or 2 ago. And I'll just read the headline of one of the paragraphs here. It says, Chinese investors pick luxury watches over houses. The wealthy are spending their extra cash on Rolexes as rare downturn grips property sector. And it says here, property has been a one-way bet in most Chinese cities, but the urban housing market was liberalized in the late 90s. Now it says here, most of the wealthy in China, well, not most, but a big percentage of the wealthy in China have traditionally bought houses as a store of value. But now they're shifting their extra cash into Rolexes, Pateks, and other luxury brands. Is this a trend you've been noticing all around the world, or is this exclusive to just China?
No, it's all around the world. It's all through Asia, all through North America, and India, everywhere. There's a huge movement going on in terms of collectors that are considering mechanical watches art, no different than modern art. However, some watches have appreciated even more than art. And as a result, you have to honor the craft, because let's face it, the baseline is none of us needs a mechanical watch. The time on your cell phone is the most accurate time you can get today. And yet we're willing to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for a piece that takes up to 2 years to make, meticulously by an artist that started their career when they were 14 or 15 years old. To become a master watchmaker is a dedication of a lifetime. And that's one of the things I do when I collect watches. I honor the art. And the makers know that I do that and give me access to the pieces. Watch collecting is a very complicated pursuit. It's about relationships and honoring brands and collecting brands and getting to be known within the community as somebody who's in it for the reasons that are long-term in nature.
When you got into the hobby, or the passion, if I may call it that, you didn't think about it as maybe buying your first moon watch as an investment item, did you?
No, I didn't. I just wanted that thing because I was a bit of a science geek, and the piece was covered by all the space magazines and the journals of the time. There was no internet then, so you'd be running around trying to find the magazines and get a copy of it, talking about the movement, the astronauts that wore it, how the watch worked. It's a chronograph. I mean, and when I finally got that piece as my first piece, I was literally to the moon.
Figuratively, hopefully one day literally as well. But Kevin, watches have, the high-end watches at least, have gone up tremendously in value. I was actually at a dealer here in Vancouver. I was looking at some Omegas, just browsing, and they told me just January they raised the price again. I think it's happened 2 or 3 times in the last year. Every quarter or something, they raise the price by a little bit. It's more than beat inflation. It's just outpaced everything else by a lot. Why the price inflation in Rolexes and Pateks and all the high-end watches that are hard to find? What happened in the last 2 years, Kevin?
Well, in the last 2 years, let's say on Omega as a brand, Omega was acquired by the Swatch Group. And generally, when a giant behemoth luxury brand takes over a watch brand, that sometimes is not a good outcome for that brand. But in the case of Omega, it worked out because, as you know, they affiliated themselves with the James Bond brand, and they brought out James Bond pieces that were very, very popular. The quality of the calibers, the movements remained high, which is very important to collectors. And then you had this phenomenon of great dial design in the last 2 years. Omega's watchmakers and artistry has really, really been cutting edge in terms of bringing forward the sports watch and even the dress watch. Are not as much as in favor for any brand. Sports watches right now in the steel format is smoking hot. And Omega hit it in stride. And then along comes the Snoopy, which just went viral. And so when a brand gets a hit like that, it just pulls up the entire brand. And today, collectors covet Omegas, particularly vintage Omegas. And also the Snoopy is a must-have in every collector's portfolio.
It's hard to find, Kevin.
They're very, very hard to find. And I'm a very, very lucky guy because I'm well known as a collector. Yeah. And I love to tell the stories of my watches. They know I don't resell them. So I'm able to call up the maisons and make my case. And I never ask for a watch for free. I want to honor the artist. I'll buy it, and I never resell it.
Well, speaking of buying something, it's difficult to buy a Rolex these days. You can't. Very few authorized dealers will let you walk in unless you're Kevin O'Leary, I suppose. You have to have a waiting list, 2 to 3 years. What's going on with the supply there, Kevin?
So Rolex is one of the largest watchmakers in units supply. However, most collectors must have every Rolex, the Batman, the Panda, and it goes on and on and on. And knowing we were going to be talking today, I went to the vault today and pulled some examples. Now,
appreciate it.
When you're a collector, the baseline is to own every Rolex. And I have that disease too. And so when Rolex brings out movements, there are some extremely coveted Rolexes. And right now, the hottest Rolex, first, let's start with the classic. Yeah. This is actually the previous white-faced steel Daytona. It has the steel bezel, not the ceramic black. This is an extremely coveted watch, and it's no longer available, so you'd have to buy it vintage if you could get it. The appreciation of this watch is insane. However, this is baseline. You want one of these, and I'm very fortunate to have one. However, if you want to take it to the moon, so to speak, and you want the most coveted Rolex in the world today, it's this.
Wow, what is that?
The Rainbow. Now, the Rainbow, it's unknown how many they make. It's unknown how you get one. Everything's unknown about this, other than most people have never held or touched one. It takes a long time to make because it's got diamonds. It's encrusted in diamonds that actually have the colors of the rainbow on it. So can you imagine how long it takes the jeweler to make this? And so it's got pave diamonds on it as well, as you see here. It's beautiful rose gold. The reason this went crazy as a watch is the NBA players all want one. Now, I've been offered, maybe this watch at retail is about $117,000. Today it trades at $550,000.
Wow.
So that gives you an idea of the appreciation. Would I sell this? Never. Even rarer than this would be what's called the Eye of the Tiger.
That one I know, yes.
Yeah, the Eye of the Tiger, people should realize Rolex not only makes incredible watches and calibers, they have state-of-the-art jewelers. So when these are factory, now a lot of people buy Rolexes and then take them out of factory and jam diamonds all over them. That destroys the value, kills the soul of the watch, makes it worthless to a collector like me. You want factory. Now these are blinged out watches. They're perfect for me in Miami, where I want to be flashy and trashy. And wherever I go, people go out of their minds when they see these watches.
No.
But that gives you an idea of the appreciation you can get. And of course, they're part of my vast portfolio of Rolex vintage and current watches. And that's the baseline. Most people start with Rolex, but there's so many other ways to go and so many other brands you have to explore.
Just the Eye of the Tiger, for example, the one you just shown, how many of those are there in the world? It's
unknown. It's unknown. In order to be offered one, you need a relationship with a Rolex dealer. Rolex have to know who you are. You have to be known as a collector. You can go into the secondary market, but if you want to buy at retail, you have to be committed to the brand. And that's what really matters.
Let me ask you this, Kevin. I mean, there are companies, obviously Rolex is one of the most knocked off brands in the world. Suppose I made a company, I'm not saying I would, but suppose I had a company that replicates Rolexes to almost perfection. If I could hypothetically replicate something that you've just shown, down to the nut and bolt, down to the movement, to the accuracy, would I be able to sell it for as much if the watch buyer knows that it's a replica?
So it's been attempted many, many times. And where you see the error in the fault in the watch, let's go back to the most ripped off watch or knocked off watch there is. It's the Eye of the Tiger and certainly the steel white-faced Daytona. These are two that are knocked off like crazy. And I won't even mention what country they're done in. They're never able to match the artistry of what the jeweler does on the dial. I can take a lube and tell you right away that it's a fake. Now, before you make a purchase like this anyways, you're going to get it authenticated. And even if you're doing it in the secondary market, the Tourneaus of the world, they provide authentication services because if I was going to buy this in the secondary market, I would want the original box, I'd want the paper, I'd want the provenance of the watch, and I want it authenticated for insurance purposes. So, knocked off Rolexes are just that. They're knocked off Rolexes. I think what's far more interesting is what's being contemplated by the watch industry now is the NFT. Because if you can take a scan of the dial of a watch down at the micron level, it's essentially its fingerprint, attach it to an NFT and authenticate the watch in perpetuity with your cell phone by simply rephotographing it, matching it to the original scan, and you'll know it's the watch that was actually issued and manufactured. And I'm very much involved in that process. I funded a white paper on this we're working on right now to try and standardize the protocol of that NFT. I'm hoping to be, by July, have that thing worked out and be issuing NFTs and minting NFTs in the secondary market.
Some watch NFTs I've read have been selling for higher prices than the actual watches themselves. So if you're doing this, Kevin, what's your target audience? Who do you think would go in and buy a watch NFT?
So I'm a big believer that, let me tell you a problem that I have and most watch collectors have and many people that have watches have. Let's say you're a collector and you have many watches.
Yeah.
Your insurance bill is very, very high because you're basically insuring watches that are in a vault under a street in some city somewhere, even though you may only keep 10 or 20 with you at any one time. I went to the vault today and pulled out a bunch of pieces so we could talk about it. When we're finished, I'll go back to the vault and put them back in. I only keep with me about 11 to 12 pieces a day. And so I wear 3 different watches a day, one for the morning, one for lunch, one for the evening. They all have red bands on them for television reasons. We can talk about that later. But the point is that I don't need to insure the rest of the collection. So if I had an NFT, I could simply open that up, send it to the insurance companies online and say, for the next 10 days, I have 11 watches out. Bid me insurance on these. Here's the city I'm in. Here's where I'm going. So that solves a big economic problem. Number 2, authenticity. If the NFT can authorize the watch and stay with it in perpetuity, that's absolutely fantastic. Number 3, inventory control. Because I have watches in multiple cities, the NFTs could actually be where I move them from one vault to another, and they would always know with a single glance where the piece is when it was last used. So the digitization of watches is definitely coming. In addition, the watchmaker, particularly watchmakers that make watches for less than $1,000, where they make millions of watches, know nothing about their user base. They don't get any registration cards. With the NFT, in order to authenticate and get the insurance, you would have to download their app, give them the information, and all of a sudden they know everything about their customer base, and they can make you offers based on the dial you bought, based on the style you bought, based on the price point you like. So there's a huge economic incentive for the industry to get behind this, and I'm very proud to be part of the team that's pushing this agenda forward.
Let's talk about those red bands. I know you have a signature red band on your watches that you wear for Shark Tank exclusively, but I'm curious to know how that process works, because these red bands aren't native to the watches. Do you buy them from, let's say, a third-party vendor, or do you go to the factory themselves and say, I would like a particular watch with a red rubber band on it? Because sometimes these watches, they have bracelets built into the case, so it's probably even difficult to take off the original bracelet, is it not? How does that process work?
So the majority of the watches that I buy today are one of a kind, made for me. So the Maison makes the red band. I'm extremely fortunate, but I feel I've earned it over the 30, 40 years I've been collecting watches. They know who I am. They know what I do. They know why I need a red band. So that Snoopy, for example, that will be a factory red band with the actual Omega clasp on it. Maybe it's the only one in the world. I don't know, but it's going to look terrific on season 14 Shark Tank. But on top of that, there are many makers that don't have red bands. So I work exclusively, and I have no economic interest in this company, and I don't own any shares. But I've done so much research, because when you put a band, a third-party band on a watch, the integration with the case, and I'll give you an example. Let me find one here. Let me give you an example. This is a jumbo Audemars Piguet, an AP. This is one of the most the blue face, one of the most coveted APs ever made. The classic. Now, AP does not make a red band for this. No. So this band is from a company called Rubber B. But AP knows that I wear red bands, so they gave me an integration kit. And Rubber B makes such a perfect integration that there's no space between the rubber band and the actual case. And so I have these steel lugs that makes that possible. This piece with a red band and a blue face looks absolutely spectacular. I've worn it on Shark Tank many times. But the point is, Rubber B is a Swiss company. They're headquartered here in Miami. They make the best integrations ever for Rolexes, for all kinds of watches, AP, Patek, you name it. And so they actually have a very, very fine molding system that gives you this incredible integration that you're seeing here. And so I work exclusively with them. But every piece I have has a red band. And so even a Patek Phillipe, this is a world timer. This is this is a very, very special piece. An anniversary piece of the 175th anniversary of Patek Philippe, renowned for the black dial on it, which is just incredible. And now it has a red band, again, a masterful make by Rubber B that allows me to wear this on Shark Tank. And I'll say this, if a maker does not like me having a red band I will say to them, look, I'll only wear it on Shark Tank because I have to have continuity and I will take it off after that. Vacheron, this is an incredible piece. This, you can see, is a factory red band because it's got the Vacheron clasp on it. This brand is really moving up the feeding chain in collectability right now.
Right.
They're one of the ones that was being held back the last 2 years, and now they've exploded to the upside.
Well, I want to spend a few minutes talking about brands now, Kevin. You've brought up some of the ones that I wanted to talk about. Vacheron, AP, Patek. Why are these three called the Holy Trinity? Why are they so revered?
Desirability, history, the fact that they've been watchmaking in some cases for over 150 years. The unique designs of them are important. It is very rare for a watch company during the lifetime of the founder to reach a coveted status of collectability. And yet there has been a brand in the last 22 years that's achieved the same status as a Patek, an AP, a Rolex, even though the company only makes 12,000 watches and since the beginning of time, 900 a year. And there's never been a story like it. It's FP Journe, a French national who moved to Geneva, who makes watches that are so coveted that 87% of the new pieces are owned by the collector base. They are rabid to get those watches. And the appreciation on these pieces in the last 3 years has exploded. I'll show you one that used to be the entry level, Le Bleu, it's called, this incredible blue dial, this unique blue dial. 60% of these dials, when they're manufactured, are rejected by FP Journe's quality control. So it's very expensive to make. The dial can be black, it can be blue. The metal is tantalum, which is a beautiful gray. Again, it has the red band factory for me. But what happened to this watch a few years ago, entry price was $28,000. The rumor has it, and I love the rumor mill around watches, Putin was seen wearing this on his wrist. The value of this watch exploded. Now it's $128,000, but you can't get one.
Right.
And Teddy Baldassar did a great video. I encourage everybody to go see it. He talked about the heritage of this piece. When I wear this piece, I get stopped in the street. This dial is all about creating conversations. It's so unique. And yet it was an entry-level Journe. It was one of his most inexpensive pieces. But the brand has exploded. That's what's happened.
Well, and Journe is still alive today. He's not, he's still with us. If you had to ask him something, one question you had to ask Journe today, what would that be?
Well, I see FP quite a bit. We were at Watch Week in Dubai just a few weeks ago. I was with him in California. I'm part of the groupie band of collectors that meets up with him. I'm always interested in what's next. Because this guy is a genius, and he sits around the pool at a watch show, or he was once in Las Vegas, and he dreamt up the Astronomique, a $1 million watch he makes, one of a kind for each individual collector. They are incredibly coveted. The way you have to look at collecting Journe is, imagine if you knew the value of a Picasso, and you personally knew Picasso while he was alive, and he would paint a Picasso for you. Can you imagine what that would be like? That's exactly what's happening with Journe right now. Yeah. Everybody I know that's a collector calls me and says, Kevin, we know you know FP. Is there any way you can get me an FP Journe? And that journey is about forming a relationship with the brand. It always is, it's like a Roger Smith. It's like AP, which now you have to have your own account with them to buy. They're managing their brand masterfully. And it's to your benefit because your pieces appreciate in value the minute you walk out of the store with them.
That is something rare that we'll touch on that just towards the end of the interview. You're a dial guy, and I know you that's something that you look at when choosing something for your collection. I want to bring up 2 or 3 brands that are a little bit out there when it comes to dials. Richard Mille and Jacobs & Co. How do you feel about these?
I know them both. I saw Jacob at Watch Week. He had a spectacular booth. He was showing some of his most eclectic pieces. They are really beautifully made, and these are high art. That's what they are. I don't own either of them. Actually, I do own one Jacob, a beautiful piece. I have that because it's a gorgeous red dial that works so well on Shark Tank. The high-end pieces are really jewelry combined with, a sound understanding of horological development. So the creation of the timepiece itself. It's a little different than the direction I go in collecting. I love them. There's no question. Mille is a whole different kettle of fish. I mean, the actual size of the dial and the piece itself and the weight of it is an acquired taste. I do not own any Richard Milles right now. I've been looking at them for 2 to 3 years. That's not unusual for me. I've been talking to the brand. Mm-hmm. It is very, very successful. It is extremely coveted within the crypto crowd. Bitcoin 2022 will be in February here. Mille will undoubtedly have a boutique right at the Bitcoin show because so many people. But that style of watch, Mille is a pioneer in that style. Let me show you a company that is doing something similar.
Yes.
This is Avanti, an Australian entrepreneurial group. This is a giant chunk of sapphire with a skeleton tourbillon inside it. This is a beautiful piece. This actually is a one of a kind. It's a Mr. Wonderful. It has a black and red band, obviously. Again, this is the kind of style where you're getting a very, very large dial. You're making a statement. It's extremely creative, but to be made out of sapphire, these watches sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars. However, this entrepreneurial group has figured out a way to bring them to the market in more of the $12,000, $15,000, $20,000 range and less. Mm-hmm. So I really appreciate this kind of artistry being made affordable. And I have several of these pieces from Avanti. But you're right. These are more on the modern art. They call them the Andy Warhols of watches, and they deserve a place in your collection. But these are when you start to extend into the micro brands. I was going to mention when you're talking about dials. Speaking about micro brands, every once in a while within the collector community, I'll get a phone call. I used to think I had the world's largest watch collection until I went to the United Arab Emirates. I'm a nothing burger compared to what those guys are doing. And I've met some of them. In fact, I think I've met the largest watch collector in the world. We become very close friends, and he's one of the royal family. He called me up and said, "Have you ever heard of a Ming?" I said, "I've never heard of a Ming." He said, "This brand is getting smoking hot out of Singapore." Ming is a photographer, artist. He designs dials and he makes his movements in Switzerland. This is a Ming. This beautiful floating dial is unique with this incredible skeleton, crystal in the back to see the movement. But what matters about this Ming is Ming makes very few watches, but he decided to make one of a kind Ming for himself. Ming's Ming. And I learned about the brand through my UAE connection. I emailed the company. The production manager came back and said, "My goodness, Kevin, we love Shark Tank in Singapore. Yeah. Are you going to be wearing the Ming you buy on Shark Tank?" Yeah. I said, "I don't know. I have to go through wardrobe. And it's going to need a red band anyways."
Okay.
And he said to me, "Look, Ming is willing to give you the Ming made for Ming. You'll get Ming's Ming. You're going to have to pay more for it. You'll have the only Ming ever made in the world for Ming. It'll be a one of a kind. Here it is."
What's special about that one? Why is it one of a kind?
He made a one-of-a-kind case for himself out of a very, very extreme metal here. And so it was designed for him to wear on his wrist as Ming's Ming.
Yeah.
When a maker gives you an honor like that, this is an incredible piece in my collection. And so I talk about this story. And again, here we are. A dial is creating a story. That's what great watch collecting is about. Sure. Each watch has a story. That's the whole point.
Okay. A few more questions and I'll let you go. Now, watchmaking, we've talked about the horology and the pieces that you like. What about watches as an investment? If somebody were to buy a collection for themselves with the mentality of having an investment portfolio of watches, what are some of the top brands you would recommend?
If you're going to be buying vintage watches, you have to go to Paul Boutros at Phillips or John Reardon, who is probably the most respected specialist in Patek Phillipe. But the whole idea about watch collecting is it's a lifetime journey. And I want to explain it this way. People think they can buy watches, flip them, trade them. If you want to be a real collector and be coveted in terms of you collecting watches and be respected by the makers, You're buying pieces for your estate. If I ever sold, here's an FP Journe, of which there's only 10 made. This measures 100th of a second with these dials. There's only 10 of them. The pursuit of this watch, thousands of people wanted these 10 pieces. This was for the New York boutique a couple of years ago. The only reason Journe sold me this piece is he knows I'm never selling it. It's going to remain with me my whole life. And when I pass, it'll be in my coffin with all the rest of my watches because I'm going to need them in the afterlife. It's a very long time on the other side and you need a good watch. Just kidding on that one. But my collection will probably go to auction. And at that time, Journe, or these predecessor of Journe, will understand why they went to auction, and obviously not ping my family or say that that's a bad thing. But if I were to sell this watch, I would be banned in perpetuity, not only by Journe, by all the maisons. You just don't do that. You just don't do that. This is a great investment. I'm up probably 300% on this watch since I bought it. People offer me money for this all the time. I would never sell it. It's about keeping, but what a great capital appreciation. It's art. It's no different than buying a Warhol.
So you're recommending the, I guess, the less mainstream brands, not the Omegas, not the Rolexes. I'm sensing more boutiques.
No. Let's talk baseline. Rolex, very collectible. Okay, really good investment. Patek Phillipe, incredibly good investment. You can't go wrong with a Patek. Audemars Piguet, AP, absolutely. I mean, I'm wearing the 5911 right now is my chosen piece for this for lunch today. This came into the market a couple of years ago. I got one of the first 100 made. It was not widely appreciated, but either was the original AP. We talked about the design, the Royal Oak, when it came out. If you're offered the first of a new model, you have to take it because over time, it will always be one of the first 100s. And of course, it's appreciated in value. I was going to mention, Patek, they just stopped making the 5711. This coveted piece, it almost doubled in value on that announcement, on that press announcement. A 5711, you can no longer get one, is probably the most coveted Patek right now. It's steel, but it's a classic. So the value has gone up dramatically. And you mentioned earlier, probably the most unappreciated brand in the world, Grand Seiko. The quality of these watches, this is a Grand Seiko lacquer, special edition of 100. Yeah. You cannot, the crunch, when you just actually wind it, the crunch is legendary. The quality of these is equal to a Patek Philippe. If you're going to start, this is a great brand to start in, Grand Patek, because you're getting such value. Absolutely spectacular. I was going to mention another brand. So many brands. Longines is making amazing watches, absolutely gorgeous. Here's another called the Superman Seiko, a beautiful starter watch, beautiful blue dial, incredible polishing. I mean, look, don't get me going, as they say. I could go all day.
I was gonna ask you, because if you're a beginner, let's say you want to start a portfolio for yourself and you're a beginner, watches under 5K, where should you go? You mentioned a few already, Longines.
You want to go Longines. You want to go Grand Seiko, no question about it. Those are baselines. You want it. There's some Omega pieces you can dabble in. You can go to the vintage market and look for other pieces. I mean, I'm just purveying, some of the watches I brought out of the safe here. We've looked at almost all of them. The key to this, though, is do not buy a watch that you cannot afford. Buy a watch that you fall in love with, and wait for that opportunity. Start to appreciate the pursuit of horology, the pursuit of dials, the pursuit of storytelling. But right now, I did a shoot with Teddy recently at a Longines boutique here in Miami, and I saw dials. That company, which is not as well known in North America, is huge in Asia, makes incredible watches at extremely affordable prices. I mean, same with Grand Seiko. Remember, there's Seiko and there's Grand Seiko. Grand Seiko, you can get entry-level pieces in there, and they're absolutely spectacular, like the Superman I just showed you. Start in places like that, Omega, the Swatch Group. I mean, you can't go wrong. And Bulova, there's vintage pieces, American watch company. I own them all. I mean, I don't chase price. I chase dial. I want the dial.
That's what I like about you as a collector, because you're not a watch snob. You don't just go for the higher end stuff. You buy things that appeal to you on a personal level, and you have the entire spectrum of watches. I want to end the conversation on Japanese watches, because you mentioned Grand. I'm wearing one myself. I love it. This is a spring drive GMT. And when I first got the watch, I set it to my phone. And 2 weeks later, it was still running perfectly to the second to my phone. Do you know another watch that has that level of accuracy that is also a mechanical watch, Kevin?
Very few. Very, very few. The history of Grand Seiko, very few people know this, but they were one of the very first makers of watches. It grew out of the lock industry, and Japan started making fine watch pieces before the Swiss. And in the 70s, when they had these contests to test accuracy in Switzerland, the Japanese won year after year after year. And it manifests itself in the Grand Seiko heritage. Those spring drives are incredible pieces. The technology inside of that watch is the best on earth in some ways, in terms of what they've developed there. And they keep getting better. The accuracy is insane. But the other thing about them is they covet the design of the dial. They have beautiful contrast on those dials, and the polishing of the steel and the other precious metals is off the charts. So I can't say enough about them. I have many, many Grand Seikos now, and I consider them to be some of the finest pieces I own. But they are, the Swiss kind of have the biggest branding, but in terms of quality, you can't go wrong with the Grand Seiko and some of the other brands we've talked about. I mean, watch collecting is a disease. It's a virus.
Yeah.
It's very expensive. It's my wife is really pissed at me because I keep coming home with watches, and she says, "What are you, crazy? I'm going to get you help. This is insane. You're wearing 3 to 4 watches a day, and you still can't get into your collection in a year. It's insane." And so you've got to stop. You've got to stop. And of course, I don't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay. Well, I mean, you are a true connoisseur, and I thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking about watches with you, and I look forward to having you on the show again. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Yes, and thank you for watching Kitco News. I hope you learned something from Kevin today, and I certainly did. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more.